just say a word of introduction about our speakers, and then they will both come and present. And as I say, Arnie, in his presentation, I think is going to engage you in some conversation also, and then we'll have a time afterwards for questions. Be thinking of things you'd like to talk more about. We have time limits today, and they're only able to cover a portion of what obviously you can do under this huge theme. So be thinking of questions you want to have. We'll have a chance to do that, and then we'll conclude with some discussion at tables at the very end. So our first presenter, of course, is our senior pastor here at this church, the Reverend Roger Gench. Many of you are very familiar with him. Others of you who are guests have probably seen or met Roger at other times during his now 14 years at this congregation. He's very involved, obviously, in community affairs through WIN and other relationships with other congregations also, so many of you may have met him. He, before serving here, was pastor of the Brown Memorial Presbyterian Church in Baltimore, and that's where he first encountered community organizing, and our other guest, Arnie, Graff, the organization build. Many of the insights and stories in the book come from that period. Before that, if you go way back, those of us who in this church also know Roger was formerly a Southern Baptist, which is where he and I again connected, and attended sometime at my alma mater, so another way in which I felt enormously comfortable here, sometime studying theology at Baylor, as well as the other graduate theological work he has done. So Roger has been involved with both Build and Win, and he'll be talking about that as part of his remarks. Arnie Graff, it's not an exaggeration to say, is a legend in the world of community organizers. He has been organizing in communities around this country for half a century. So you can imagine, we had all day how many stories you could get from Arnie about his experiences. He's never had a real job. He's just been a community organizer his whole life.
Sounds like my wife.
And he is from New York originally. He has done most of his work in Chicago through the Industrial Areas Foundation, of course, which is, if you trace back, almost all of the community organizing being done in this country is in some ways branches out from the work done by the Industrial Areas Foundation and Saul Alinsky back after World War II. And so he had been in Chicago with IAF. If you Google Arnie, you'll come up with some great stories. I urge you to do this, but particularly you will come up with stories of his recent experience in England, where after 50 years almost of organizing in communities, he, for the first time, got involved in electoral politics and party politics, and worked as an advisor to the head of the Labour Party in prelude the last 2 or 3 years leading up to the election, which was on Thursday. And there are many interesting stories about Arnie and his experiences in England that will come up in that regard. And so that's the one. But he's back here now, and he's working in Metro IAF. And again, we're really pleased to have him. So Roger will come first, and then after that, Arnie, and then we'll have a question period after that. So Roger Gench, please welcome.
She's read the book too. She is the primary editor of the book, and it was a bloody experience getting her to pass that book past my wife. But it was a good experience, and it's well written. Much thanks to Francis Gench. And I want to thank Jessica Tate and Joe Daniels back here for providing blurbs for the book. You'll see there's stuff on the back. What I want to do today is just talk with you just a little bit about the theology behind the book, because that was the impetus for the book. The truth is, I had no intention of ever writing a book, and I was serving on the General Assembly Mission Council of the Presbyterian Church, and sat with and got to know the editor of the Presbyterian Publishing, and he turned to me after about 4 meetings and said, Roger, why don't you write a book for us? And I said, well, I can barely get a sermon written. I'm not sure I'm going to ever get a book written. And then finally, an editor got in touch with me and said, why don't you give it a shot? And I said, okay. And I tried 2 chapters, and she didn't like them, and so I just let the whole project go. And then they got back to me and said, well, look, shoot us 3 chapters, just sketch it out, and we'll see what happens. And they accepted it, and I ended up writing a book. I had to base it theologically, and that was probably the hardest part about the book. And since I've written it, the biggest reactions to the book have been in and around the theological base for it. And so what I want to do primarily with you today is talk about what, in my opinion, is a Christian theological base for community organizing in the church. A Christian theological base for community organizing in the church. And for those of you here that are from New York Avenue, you won't be surprised that I based it in the notion of cruciformity, that is cruciform, which is cross-shaped. Now, when theologians use the word cross, they mean cross and resurrection. So it's not simply the historical event of the cross, it's the whole event. The whole notion is kind of bound up in that, and especially the word cruciform, it has that at its base. The cruciform can be Christian, it can be Buddhist, it can be Muslim, I'm finding out. It can be Jewish. Abraham Joshua Heschel's notion of pathos is cruciform. That is life out of death-tending ways. Much what goes on in purification in Sufi Islam is cruciform. The Buddha's notion of suffering and the alleviation of suffering is cruciform. So cruciform carries weight across a variety of religious traditions. In Christianity, it gets lodged in the cross. Now, to be sure, the cross is not the favorite topic of most Christians these days because of the interpretation that's been given over the centuries of the cross. It has become an abusive symbol for some. Feminists in particular have taken issue with the way the Father needs to have the sacrifice of the Son in order to forgive us. It seems like an abusive father to most feminist theologians. The whole notion of satisfaction atonement, which has gotten into our theology, and if you're a Presbyterian, it's even enshrined on our Presbyterian Book of Order. And that is that God needs an innocent sacrifice. I think it's Heidelberg. I think it's Heidelberg. For those of you who are interested, yeah, look, I think it's Heidelberg Confession, if you want to look that up in the Presbyterian Book of Order. Presbyterian Book of Confessions. The notion that God needs an innocent sacrifice in order to assuage God's wrath against us, and that is the only way in which God can forgive us. That comes from the 10th century, roughly. The big question is whether that notion is biblical, whether it's biblical. Now, much has been discussed about that of late because there is a veritable renaissance in our understanding of the notion of the cross. The cross and its power for enabling our lives, for enabling us to see the suffering of the world. Little known but true, this was in Martin Luther's theology. When Martin Luther, and that's very big for us as Protestants, Martin Luther defined justification by grace through faith, and a God who forgives. But right next to the God who forgives is what Martin Luther defined as the theology of the cross, as opposed to the theology of glory, which was he said, was the primary theology going on in the church of his day. He says the theology of glory calls evil good and good evil, whereas the theology of the cross calls a thing what it is, that calls evil what it is. So the theology of the cross for Luther was exposing evil everywhere, exposing suffering everywhere. This really caught on, especially for folk like Dietrich Bonhoeffer in World War II. when in the middle of a Nazi prison before he was executed, Dietrich Bonhoeffer said, "Only a suffering God can help. Only a suffering God can help. A God who is forced out of the world and onto the cross." That took currency with a variety of people that were looking at the suffering of the world. Liberation theologians in the Third World were certainly doing the theology of the cross. Jürgen Moltmann, in his Crucified God, was the first Reformed theologian to really, in the modern era, to really take the theology of the cross seriously. I have in this handout basically kind of a summary of the first part of this, the theology of the cross and its currency for today. And a book that I would very much encourage you to read is Elizabeth Johnson's Quest for the Living God, because in that book, not only has she written it accessibly for all of us, but what she has done is a service to us, because she has talked about the Renaissance in our understanding of what she calls a suffering God or a cruciform God. And by the way, she is one of the theologians from whom I got the word cruciform, a God who suffers with us. Now, that is, it may seem strange to some that this is just gathering currency today, but it's not that strange when you think about it. After the Holocaust, after World War II, after globalization has put us in tune with suffering throughout the globe, the civil rights movement, a variety of liberation movements that have put us in touch with poverty, suffering in ways that we have never been in touch with. So the theology of the cross has become a very current category for many theologians, even though it still is somewhat of a minority movement. And as I have gotten reactions to the book, the predominant reaction is that they still don't understand the notion of cruciformity. So let me then just get into that and try to do it as simply as I can, the importance of it, because it is a symbol that many Christians may feel aversion to, and yet is the most potent symbol for understanding how we do not only community organizing, but how we should be about ministry. And so the theology of the cross. In the book, and what I've done here is to summarize in this handout, just a little bit of the way I've defined what I call the political theology of the cross. And by politics, I don't mean Democrat and Republican. I don't mean partisan politics. I mean something about the common life, the common good. Because the cross has, frankly, in most of Christian history, become a symbol for individual salvation or individual forgiveness of sin, rather than a symbol of politics and how we engage politics and how we get into the world. And if I understand the way the New Testament understands the cross, it is first and foremost a political theology. It is first and foremost a political theology. Ted Jennings, who probably wrote one of the better books that I have read on this subject, and it's in your handout, Transforming Atonement, a Political Theology of the Cross, notes how first and foremost for the New Testament it was a historical symbol. An historical symbol of Roman tyranny and Roman torture. It was a way to dissuade anybody from political insurrection. The cross was a horrible, horrible way to die. It was a form of torture. Many people would be on a cross for several days before they died, even though Jesus wasn't on the cross for that long. It was a horrible, horrible form of torture. And in the book, I liken it to modern military techniques of shock and awe to try to dissuade anybody from rebellion. That's what the cross was politically for the Roman Empire. The irony is that Christians took that symbol and made it into a symbol of the revelation of God in Jesus Christ, exposing all of the violence in the world for what it is. not of God. All the suffering in the world for what it is, not of God. Poverty, racism, classism, homophobia today. All of the variety of ways of exclusion that mimic the violence of the cross are exposed in the cross. And then we see the power of love coming forth from those very broken spots in the world. The power of love, and out of the vulnerability of the brokenness of the cross that gets inscribed on every one of us. And that notion is an important notion for me. Because violence in the world gets inscribed on us whether we know it or not. Crucifixions in the world get inscribed on it whether we know it or not. Because the cross reveals the small and large crosses that litter the landscape of the world, and they get inscribed on us to the point that sometimes we're not even aware of the violence that is in us. The racism, the sexism, the kind of stuff that gets in us are, in essence, crucifixion. It gets exposed for what it is. As Martin Luther said, the cross, the theology of the cross, calls a thing what it is. It says, this is it. For this reason, it's not a comfortable symbol, because we don't like to look at these kinds of things. It's not just about personal sin. It's about structural sin. It's about the stuff that's all about us. Then, at those very points, the God who is bringing life out of the death-tending ways of the world can bring life to each one of us as we connect with others in our very forms of brokenness. And this is, to me, the power of community organizing. The power of the relational meeting, the power of listening campaigns, is coming out of those broken spots where we connect deeply one with the other. Those broken spots, which we call cruciform spots, are the places where we grow strong. In the book, I do a rendition of Ernest Hemingway's quote from Farewell to Arms, "The world breaks everyone, and then some grow strong in the broken places." The rendition I do is slightly different. It is, the world crucifies everyone, but God is always already in those crucified places bringing life and wholeness. It is in those very places, in other words, that we gain community, we gain strength, we gain the power to resist the violence in the world. So this is what cruciformity, in essence, is about. It's about joining one with the other from those vulnerable inscriptions of the cross, those broken places, in community, in communities of resistance to the violence that is all about us. And the way I would work that is Martin Luther King, Gandhi's notion of nonviolent resistance, is the power of the cross in the world. The other notion that I lift up in the book, which is on the second page of your handout, is the notion of cruciform covenant. Because I added covenant to the notion of cruciform, even though I think covenant is implicit in cruciform. But I just wanted to spell it out more fully because of the differentiation between covenant and contracts. And the individualism that is current in most everywhere we go, and how we join more often than not through a contract, through a you scratch my back, I'll scratch your back kind of relationship. Whereas the Christian notion of covenant goes much deeper. It again goes to those broken places where we bind together one to the other in a way that is not only unconditional, but is loving and is healing and is reconciling, such that we could never, ever separate one with the other. Just as God has loved us in an unconditional way and formed covenant with us, God asks us to form covenant one with the other. So that's in essence, my theology that undergirds what I think is community organizing is about, what the church is about. what we're all called to be and to do is to be in those broken places, is to see them through the power of the cross, is to find healing and love through that power, and then find covenant relation one with the other. And then emerging from there is finding the issues that we need to commonly act on in our nonviolent resistance in the world. So that's the theology of the cross. That's the theology that I develop in the book in a nutshell. Tried to be succinct, tried to be clear. Questions? Observations? Yes?
If you're going to try to describe hell, so cruciformity moves us to some sense of good. How do you describe that? And I think oftentimes we describe that as what's good for the individual, or I don't know if there's great language to describe what and whether the goal is the correct term, but what the goal of things are. Could you say something about that? So, if crucifixion and violence are the things that are being resisted,
Right.
transformed, to what?
I think the goal there is the beloved community that Martin Luther King talked about. It's the community of enemies and friends. It's the community of folk who are broken and healed. The beloved community is the most powerful symbol I think we have of the church, which is not just of like-minded people. It's people we're polarized with. It's with the enemy. It's the community that comes out of Good Friday. And for me, Good Friday becomes also the symbol of crucifixion. And probably more than anything else, walking through Holy Week and Easter for all these years has helped me to form my understanding of Christian theology and the cross. Good Friday is good in an ironic sense. It's good by bringing wholeness out of brokenness. Reconciliation when we were enemies. Love out of hatred. It is good in that it exposes all of who I am in my brokenness and all that God wants to do with me, but not just me, my community. So it moves us towards that beloved community, which becomes a community of resistance in the world to the violence that is going all about us. I don't think that gets at your question. No, I can tell it doesn't.
Well, I think we have had such a high value for individuals.
Yeah.
That it clouds the sense of what community and what beloved is. Or on the other hand, the pluribus unum, kind of where we all are the same, and so there's a conformity. So I don't know quite how to fix that sense of community, beloved community, into those kinds of things that are in our culture.
Well, in many ways, cruciformity and covenant and community organizing are all trying to counter the radical individualism of the world and the contract realities all about us. I mean, if I was to define one great evil in the world, it is a radical individualism that treats us as if we were billiard balls, just bouncing into one another, that we're consumers and not citizens, that we are, in Martin Buber's terms, the great Jewish philosopher wrote the word I, thou, that we're I-its instead of I-thous. So in many ways, what Christian community and community organizing for me, if the great theme of what we're trying to do is to create a community of thous, is to create a community of covenant one with the other. It's great, to be very practical, is to create a community where we actually know one another's stories. We know one another's stories of brokenness. We know one another's stories of transformation. We know one another's stories of deep connectedness that form the glue in us that counter this radical individualism that's trying to separate us not only in the economy, but in politics. Because politics, in the sense of Democratic and Republican politics, is about individualism. They're after your vote. They're not after your community. In fact, And one of the most dangerous things that we can do is form community, because that's power, and that can counter the politics of the world.
We'll have more time later for some additional questions. This is another quick one for Roger. Yeah. Okay, thank you for that. And again, we'll have a question period here in a second. Yeah, thank you, Roger. And look forward to Arnie, your remarks to build on that. So, Arnie Graff. You need this for the, okay. It's good to be here. It's always good to be here, Roger. Before I start, I'd like to recognize these two people. I came to Washington, D.C. At the invitation of just a couple of pastors and founding pastors here. Joe Daniels, pastor of Emory United Methodist Church. So win-win to be here. He guided me along the way. Amy Bruno, who is sitting in the back of my beautiful daughter, who is taking them into another level. I'm just going to say a couple of words, and then we're going to have a discussion, and then when we come back, we can have Q&A. For me, the central issue, and I think it leads to the kind of power that Roger is talking about, but is the essential issue is power, which comes from the Spanish word poder, to be able. And without, the word is loaded with all kinds of feelings, but the essential, that's what the word is. And one of the dictionary definitions of it in Webster is the ability to act. So it's to be able, the ability to act. And we all individually have ability to act, but we are much stronger when our ability to act is in concert. So the question is, how do we gain that kind of power? What I call relational power, as opposed to dominant power. Or dominant power, unfortunately, which we see most in the world, the sense of power is that it is finite. Think of a pie tin, and you have some, I have some. We have 4 children. When they were growing up, it was like if there was a piece of pie. You had to, if there was a pie out there, you had to protect the youngest because she wouldn't get any of it. Because our boys were big and they felt they had a right to all of it. So the notion of dominant power, unilateral power, which is power over, I'm over you, as opposed to the concept of power, which is called relational power. And that is that the concept of power is infinite, because essentially it doesn't come from us. And so it's infinite. If God is the Alpha and the Omega, then power is infinite. And so actually, if I mix my ability to act with your ability to act, I have more power. It's not finite, it is infinite. And we're called to act together. I think that goes along with what Roger was talking about. And when we do, we realize we have more capacity, not less capacity. How do you get into that kind of relational power? What does that mean? Well, the best way I know to get into a relationship with someone, not necessarily friendship or romantic relationship. I'm all for that. I've been married 42 years. All this number of nights left there, but not that kind of relationship, but a public relationship in which we share our brokenness, we share our stories, we share our joys, not just our brokenness, and then we find out our mutual interests, and then we have to act. So it isn't just stay in a personal relationship. We're called to act. So, the best way I know to do that, never thought it was a half a century, but it's true for what it is. I'm glad I'm here. Is to sit down with a person one-to-one. One person talking to another person.
first thing I did, I was taking a year and I did a little over 1,800 individual meetings throughout the district. Congregation leaders, neighbor leaders, union leaders, business leaders, teachers, anybody I, had some leadership, some following in the, in the community, in the civic community. I would meet with politicians, I would meet with folks like that. I didn't bad people, but I was going to be an organization of elected people. And it was then that I was able to build enough trust to figure out who would sit with whom. I haven't written a book, but I've got a title in my head, which is called, from all my experiences, which is called East of the River and West of the Park. And although I've organized in many, many places, I'm reminded of my first beginnings in Washington, meeting with East of the River and West of the Park. And it didn't meet. It wasn't there. They were geographies, but people didn't know each other, didn't talk to each other, didn't do any of that. And it took about a year to bring together people from East of the Park, West of the Park, to begin to have conversations with each other. And the kinds of conversations that Joe was talking about. So I'd like to wrap up this piece with, I think one of the most, and then ask you to begin conversation. I think one of the most important parts in an individual meeting, meaning one person sitting down with one person and sharing, is the power and notion of story. The question isn't only, you see what I do, but why am I doing that? I mean, what is the story behind all of that? As a quick example, my father was, the rest of the piece. He was very poor, had never finished school, went through the Depression, literally 5 kids and his mother and father in one room, all of that, real poverty. Later in life, as he did better, he still operated in a certain way. He wasn't uncomfortable anymore. He wasn't phenomenally rich, but we were comfortably middle class. And sometimes people would, when they got to know my father, and as I got older, they asked me, your father's wonderful in certain ways about him. I don't understand. And I said, well, there's 2 things you have to understand about my father. One is the Depression. And I remember a friend saying, yeah, but this is 1998 or something. I said, no. His story is born out of the Depression. That's where both his frugalness comes from and his kindness comes from. So why is your father, has some money, but not a lot, so donating so much? And why is he so careful about his money? He doesn't have to worry about that anymore. And the Depression ended in the 30s, and I said, well, that's you have to understand his story in order to understand him. And let him talk to you, if you're really curious, sit down with him. But be careful, because he may provoke you to tell your story. So that's what happens inside the individual meeting. So what I'd like you to do now at your own tables, if is to, again, talk to somebody that you don't know, but try to do it in diads, I guess, 2 people. And for about 20 minutes, is that okay? 15?
Yeah, 5 minutes each person.
Oh, okay.
So, and then we'll have a little sharing.
Okay, then about 10 to 15 minutes, 5 minutes each. So, and tell a story that has shaped your life in some way. For me, I was 19 years old. It was a civil rights movement. I fell into it. Moved me from a business major to a kid who was in jail. It was a big thing. Always ruined my mother. But it opened up a world to me. So share with each other a personal story. Could be one of joy. Something happened. So we all have founding and refounding experiences. Something that led you to kind of become the person who you are, the way you think, and why you think the way you do. Okay?
Yeah, sounds great. You may need to.
I've been organizing quite a while, and I think this is the most radical thing that we can do. People have said to me, well, when you were jailed during the civil rights movement, or all these various things, that was a radical thing to do, and so forth. And in some ways, I guess it was. But I think the most radical thing we do is the individual meeting. Because if we are trying to build power, capacity to act, then power comes from, if you think about it, as I know it, in the secular world, make sure I say that from Pastor Gench, Pastor Daniels, in the secular world, we know where our real power comes from, but in the world, power comes from four places. You can either be very rich, so you're Ross Perot, you wake up one day and you're bored and you say, okay, I'll run for president. And you actually get 17 or 18% of the vote. You can have a certain status, meaning the mayor was a councilwoman. She had a certain amount of power, but by getting to be the mayor, she now has a lot more capacity to act, a lot more ability to act. So by virtue of the office, so she has more ability to act, more power. Most of us aren't in those positions of high status, unless somebody's holding out on us, or high wealth. Don't say if you are, because there's pastors here in the room, and they'll make sure you're tithing. Okay? There's only two other ways you can get it that I know. One is that you can organize people that you can deliver, not you, but the collective deliver, with a focus consistently and persistently. And I know what's going to happen in Sandown, and it breaks my heart in Baltimore. There's all this attention. First of all, there are 50 neighborhoods like Sandown. Could have been in Baltimore, but it could have been anywhere in Cleveland, Chicago, Washington, D.C. You name it, across the Midwest, East Coast, where we used to have manufacturing and good-paying jobs in our own. I know what's going to happen. There's going to be a lot of attention, and then in a month from now, Sandown will be Sandown. And we'll still have 50% African-American male unemployment. I wrote with a co-leader of the bill in the Daily News with an editorial. The only surprise I have about Baltimore is it didn't happen. I'm surprised it hasn't happened earlier and more often. That's my surprise. That means we have thousands of people here, Baltimore, lots of places, totally out of relationship. No one knows who they are. We don't know their story. But there's a judgment passed on them. And the best way to get to know them is the Washington Post to come in and give you statistics about how important they are. A person isn't a statistic. They're a human being. They're a person. And so, how do we get the kind of power where we can deliver a lot of people on a consistent, persistent basis? The issue is not enough to hold that together. Why is Bill 37 years old? I think it's because of the relationships that are there. Some people there for a particular issue, but then they leave because their issue is either we won or we lost. The base of the organization, while it still can turn out, 2,000 people and so forth and so on, could build 600 homes in that community over from 1991 to 2005, home ownership, which is called the Nehemiah Oasis by the people and themselves. We just couldn't keep going because we run out of subsidy for us to keep building. Are the relationships. There's a certain culture operating. And that's what gives Bill its power, its capacity to turn out people with a focus on a consistent and persistent basis. So in the middle of a riot that was going on, we were in the basement of St. Peter Claver, the second oldest African-American Catholic church that's in the city that's in that neighborhood. People don't think that in a riot, people think we've got to calm people down. Well, that's true. But you have to feed people because they can't get out and they can't eat. And when the CVS pharmacy store was burned down, there's no place for the elderly or anybody to get a prescription. And the CVS, because it's a food desert, the neighborhood is a food desert, the CVS is the place to shop for food because the only place you can get fresh milk and fresh eggs. So because we were in that community, it's not what necessarily read about in the national press, so I always have a hard time with media, is 50 of us cooking a hot meal, and people, because they know us, coming to escorting them to the church to make sure everything was okay, having they would come outside and walk with people who they knew from their community who were part of the build, and they'd come and then we had a meeting like this that we ate, and we talked, we heard stories, horrible stories about what went on between the police and themselves, and horrible stories about how the police didn't police them. You know, we've done a lot of studies where we call from one neighborhood where Roger used to live in Bolton Hill. The police are there literally. There was a robbery, 5 to 7 minutes. It took the police 25 minutes to get to the CVS that was burning down.
No, they were right there, 150 yards away.
Yeah.
I was out
That was standing, you're out there, okay.
They could have stopped.
They could have stopped that.
And fired out.
They were standing, I'll get to it because I don't know where Hank fits into this all stuff. But the whole phalanx of police were, as the gentleman says, right on the street, close to where it was. They did nothing. So, a little awkward that. So, it's through individual meetings that we can build our power to act. These aren't relationships that are private relationships, because if you don't take it, it means a focus to do something, a focus to act. And by building relationships, you get to understand people's story and their interests. You share your story, your interests, and then there's a call to action around those interests. So I'll wrap up with this, and then we'll just open it up for questions. Right?
Yeah.
When we, one of the things we're doing in Build now, and I met, is it Tom?
Chuck.
This dude's doing great, he does great work. But in the neighborhood that was made famous by The Wire, the Oliver neighborhood, which again could have been filmed in any place. There's nothing special about Oliver, unfortunately. It's 47% vacancy, burned down, 50% African-American male employment, and doesn't have to be Baltimore. I mean, it's Baltimore is a story of a lot of parts of the United States. Bill, with a partner, the reinvestment fund, has been rebuilding the neighborhood. So I've been trying to get David Simon to write a story called Rewire. I'm trying to we're rewiring. We're rebuilding the housing. We've built over 250 homes. We have well over 600, maybe close to 700 families now in good and decent housing, some rental, some home ownership. And we have something we call Turnaround Tuesday, which basically is we're on the street talking to all the men that are in the street. I talked to a gentleman, a friend, a colleague of mine, Jonathan, and I used to ask the gentleman one time, what's different around here? So many, men on the corner. He said, Jonathan, there's always been men on the corner. The only difference was they wait for the bus to come and take them to the jobs down to Sparrows Point to work in the mills. Now they're on the corner, there's no jobs. So they're in the same place. But the bus passes them by, there's nowhere to go. So we get on the corners, and we do something Turnaround Tuesday. We bring them through pastors, organizers, leaders in the community. We get them to come into the church on Tuesday at 10 o'clock. We do about 20 minutes. The pastor likes to do physical exercises with them, so to shake the cobwebs out of us. We do a little praying together. And then we have people telling their stories to each other, because they don't know each other. They're isolated one from another. You're at your weakest when you're by yourself. You're out of a relationship. And then we have employers come in and talk. And now what do we do with that? We have to act on it. So we acted on Johns Hopkins. And now we have an arrangement with Johns Hopkins where whenever a job is open, we have it. They will, if we recommend a person that's come out of jail, and unemployed, with a lot of returning citizens from prison, they get the job. And we were then able, through the president of Hopkins, convince him that this needed to be larger. There's 20% of the employment base in Baltimore City, like it is a lot of cities, is heads and beds. And so he called the breakfast. If I called it, no one would show. He called us, the head of Johns Hopkins. We had over 100 people, HR people from other hospitals, other universities, and we had people at tables, but at each table there were at least 2 people, men and women, who would come home from prison. shared their stories. We heard the stories, a great story from people. He said it was very moving, just my story, and then I'll break you up, why you have to act on these relationships. This fella got up, he came to the microphone, he said, 40 years old, and I've spent 23 of those 40 years in prison. So thank God someone didn't just give me a second chance. I've had about 20 chances. About 3 years ago, I said, I was exhausted living on the street. I just couldn't do it anymore. You know, I was making money, but I didn't feel human, and I didn't feel good, and I was tired of being shot, and tired of shooting at people. And he said, so Hopkins gave me a job as a janitor. I was making $12.47 an hour. I made more in a week. I used to make more in a week than I made in a year at working at Hopkins. But I felt good going to work. I felt good that someone would give me a chance. I felt good I was trying to get off the street. I felt good that two or three of my sons, I can't remember, he had 2 or 3 children, boys could see their father going to work. And now, after 3 years through the training and all we've been doing to Hopkins, I'm now a tech, an anesthesiologist tech. And now I'm in an operating room where I used to put people. And now I'm saving their lives. And I feel like a human being. And through God, and through the willingness of community organization and Hopkins, I can come home and have my 2 boys look at me and say, you know, Daddy's working all day. It was a powerful story. I've been at it a long time. The guy really brought me to tears. And I've heard this story. It's not similar, because none of them are similar, but it's just very moving. So it's the power of story, the power of relationship, and he's ready to get out on the street with all the people that he knows and say, come on in to turn around Tuesday. You come turn your life around. But you can only do what he said, and what he can come to the training, only if you're willing to get into a relationship with people, not stand out by yourself. So let me wrap it up with that, and open up for questions.
Thank you very much. We have several minutes here for questions. If Roger would come up with either question for either of them or both of them. Anything that's been mentioned here or some other question you might have about church and community organizing? Yeah, Paul and then the back. Yeah. There is a mic that I think can be passed around, and this acoustics are not great here, so.
Thank you both for your presentations. This morning is talking about the church and community organizing. What I'm trying to hear is what is distinctive about the church as a part of community organizing. Is it a special case in terms of what the church can offer, what faith communities can offer in terms of organization, as opposed to all the other possible ways that we could organize? And in particular, when so many of us, speaking for myself, live out in the suburbs yet belong to a downtown church, it seems that our ability to mobilize is distinctly kind of diluted by how churches are formed in the city at this point. So how can that be the basis of strong organization?
I'd like to hear your answer.
Okay. Well, I think there is something very distinct about the church. Although, organizations like Lynn and Bill, they're not only made up of churches. So there's local unions. Amy's doing a lot of work with the ATU, the Amalgamated Transit Union, the story of the bus drivers and what they go through. They haven't had a raise in 5 years. They live here. Their safety questions. What are they supposed to do when people, just don't have the money to get on a bus or they don't want to pay? Are they supposed to get into a fight with these bus drivers? So there's other organizations, but the church, I think it's special. I started out, I was trained to denigrate the church. I came out of CORE, Congress of Racial Equality, and they were James Farmer. They were angry at the church because they saw the church as something to preach to people and don't worry about what's going on now, it's the other life, all of that. So we never met in churches, and then I lined up, in the Peace Corps, in a small village with a Catholic priest. I'm Jewish, I had no clue. He said he was from the Order of the Holy Ghost. I said, you what? I'm in this village by myself, and a man who thinks he's a ghost. And so this Catholic priest and I formed a relationship. The stereotype is, oh, you're Jewish, I'm Irish. How about you send us over, $500,000, we can help build this building. Well, you're Jewish, aren't you, man? Yeah, I am. My mother grew up on welfare. No. Oh, what about the father? He didn't finish school. What kind of Jews are you? Like, immigrants, And so we got to know each other's stories, why he became a priest, and so forth. And then we kept friends for 40 years. Come over here. My mother would cook him lots of ball soup, and kept him going for a while. He passed away, unfortunately, a couple of years ago. I think there's something very special about the church. In terms of power, the church has elements, the two elements, potential. It has money and people. I don't think it was called for money, but it has money and people. And those are the elements. But I would say as importantly, more importantly, it has a, if we follow it, right? Whether it's, we've got a lot of mosques in the organization now, it's, Islam, Jewish, Christian. You're supposed to be your brother's keeper. I went to a rabbi and I said, I don't know very much. Rabbi, I want to study with you. And he said, you want the long version or the short version? No, I'm serious, I want to study. I said, okay, well, because the short version is, love your neighbor as yourself. That's the whole thing. That's it. Now we can go into interpretation of this and interpretation of that. But I just taught you everything that you need to know about our religion. Okay. I just want to say that what the church has, but doesn't utilize, it doesn't live off of what it says it's about. So, if you pardon me, I don't even know how to joke. The church, along with other institutions, because it does not act, I don't care if you're from the suburbs or where you can talk to somebody. You don't have to be well trained to sit and talk to somebody. The question I would ask the Eric Avenue is, why aren't you out out in the street, living or witnessing to what you're about? The church, along with other institutions, the church has let these young men, I would say, were mostly hand down. They do not connect. They maybe have a food program. But even then, I challenge the pastor, when people run the food program, can you tell me who the names of the people are that come to your program? Do you know if they're not there? If they're not there that week, do you go visit them and find out if they're alive, are they okay, or what's going on with them? They don't. And I'm not, it's a good thing to give food to people. But there's another way of nourishing somebody, and that's through relationship. Now, anybody in the suburbs, you're as broken as anybody else, okay? In your own ways, in our own ways. I live in the suburbs. I'm as broken and faulted and flawed as any other human being. But we don't get into, if we're following Roger's talk, we don't get into a relationship. We barely get into a relationship with each other. Roger and I were talking about how hard it is to get people within the congregation to do a whole series of individual meetings with themselves, right? And stay with it. So, you know, if you have 2 services in a church, you normally go to the early one or the evening one, you know, late afternoon one. I mean, I know this from my own experience. And then you want to go away for the day with your family, so you go to the earlier service. You sit down where you normally sit down. And I've had to see someone come up and like look at me, we're in the same church. And like, you know, hey, you're in my seat. I didn't know your name was in that seat. Sorry, you would kind of shit down. People won't do it. They cry out for it, but they don't do it. And local congregations don't push it to be in relationships. I was just asking Roger, let me wrap up this. I've often wondered what would happen instead of a sermon, at sermon time, message time, if the pastor said, for 20 minutes I want you to go over somebody that you don't know and tell a story and who you are and whatnot. And then, you know, and then say, wow, how buzzed the church was of you all. How alive we are, you know. Can we really form community? Now, will we do this? So I don't think it matters if it's suburban or not. I think the church is very special. You can talk about power from a theological point, not from a meaning point of value. And from being your brothers and sisters keeper, not from the point of view of politics.
Roger, you want to comment on
That was wonderful, Arnie. Thank you. I really didn't want to get your answer before, and it helped me. Two things about church and community organizing that are important to me. One, we are much more about agendas and business than we are about relationships. And relationships drive business and agendas. Relationships drive ministries. And so the power of the relational meeting and the relational meeting campaign and what we're trying to do, we've instituted a policy that every session member is supposed to be doing an individual meeting once a month, and I'd love to get that to every board so that, you know, the point is connectedness. It's getting to know our people, their passions, their stories, about their ministries, what are their interests, what are their concerns, what are the kinds of things that they want to act on, these kinds of things. And Arnie's just given me an idea for a sermon that I'm going to use, and it'll just be really wonderful. I won't have to write a sermon. So maybe next week, who knows?
We
got to do a little preaching after.
Put it in another part of the service. You got to preach.
Here's a piece that I want to challenge New York Avenue on, and that is that, well, hold on, there's 3 things I want to say. The first one is the power of relationships that fund ministry. That in large part is what the book is about, the power of relationships that fund ministry. The second piece of it is the power of the ministries themselves, and you said it, Arnie, getting to know the individuals in the ministries in our community club or in the Radcliffe room. One of the reasons these tables are set up like this tomorrow is because we'll have probably 100 to 125 homeless folk in this space tomorrow morning. And it's a breakfast program. It's also advertised as a relational program, and some of that is significantly happening, getting to know people's stories, where they come from, who folk are, getting to know names, those kinds of things. But the third piece of that, and that's deeply connecting to people that are in our ministries, but the third piece of that is an actionable item, and that is that many people, if you look at community club, I'm gonna guess that it wouldn't take much of a guess that the parents have job issues. I know the Radcliffe room folk have job issues. Many of our Radcliffe room folk work in temp work. Many of them work. They aren't just homeless. But what we used to say in Baltimore, they work for their poverty. They work for their poverty. And one of the things we're working on in WIN is an initiative with stormwater runoff jobs. The Transit Workers Union, we're working with them to get jobs. WIN has gotten a significant amount of energy going on with jobs. I would like to see us at New York Avenue connecting our folk in the Radcliffe Room, connecting our folk maybe at the community club with the kind of jobs that are possible. And John, there's another way that John Corson and I had lunched just a couple of weeks ago, and John works with an organization that provides job training for construction skills. These are the really needed, actionable things that build on the relationships that we've got that are resurrection out of crucifixion. Now that's a real concrete way of talking about cruciformity. That's a resurrection. That's life coming out of death. And I would love it if out of this meeting we can get some energy around the stormwater runoff jobs that have been promised to us. They're good jobs, providing green infrastructure for the stormwater runoff. The great thing about green infrastructure is it needs to be maintained. The promise here is, what, $15 an hour, $15 an hour jobs. The promise is with benefits. Why can't some of those go to our homeless folk? Why can't some of those go to the parents in our community club? Or maybe even the promise of some of them going to our community club. I think this is the third step of relational. And that is first relating within the congregation, getting to know one another, funding the ministry. The second step is getting to know the people in our ministries, getting to know names and stories. The third step is actionable, and actually getting them in jobs or supportive housing, which is something that we've also supported here at New York Avenue Church. These are very concrete steps that are immediately in the works. And it's something that we can engage as a church. And so, if I could just say one more thing. This is the theology of the cross as opposed to the theology of glory. Some of the theology of glory I'm not adamantly opposed to. The theology of glory is more about the religion as therapeutic. And I'm not opposed to I'm not opposed to therapy. And I'm not opposed to people feeling comforted by their religion. I'm not opposed to that at all. But if that's where it stops, then that's what Luther was critiquing. That it's all the theology of glory. It's about individualism. It's about whether I'm going to get saved or not. It's about whether I'm feeling good about this institution or not. Whether as a client of this institution, as a consumer of religion, I feel good about this church or not. That's the theology of glory. And I mean, I don't think we should ignore those questions. But the theology of glory without the theology of the cross is bankrupt. It is profoundly bankrupt. Because the theology of the cross not only connects us one with the other in our brokenness and the kind of stuff that we share in individual meetings, but it also connects us to the people we're in ministry with so that we can learn names, we learn stories, but then it moves it beyond that and connects us deeply into the kinds of maybe supportive housing, maybe jobs. These are all kinds of things that WIN has been working on and that are present for us today. If we could organize around that, I mean, it could be a really wonderful thing.
Great. Time for maybe one more question. Yeah, Joe, have you a word or a question? Yeah.
See, Arnie, this is why Ryder has to preach. Just question for you.
Can you stand up so we can for sure hear you?
You can't hear me?
Now we can. I know we're on, but the acoustics are not good here.
Go to the mic. I can't hear you. Go to the mic.
You can't hear me for real?
Go ahead.
Not very well.
Okay, not a problem. Quick question. DC is now a heads and minutes town, like Baltimore, like other cities. How would you suggest WIN partner with Bill partner with WIN to do some of the very similar things that you all are doing which parlays into the project.
Right. Great question. No, we'll get time to that. I think first step would be to get pastors and leaders in the bill together with some of the pastors who are interested, like I just know you would be, and Lionel, others, and with some of the strategies and talk about what we're doing and how we're getting these jobs. I was talking to Ed the other day on the phone, and he was Reverend Edmonton, not Baptist, and he was basically saying, how about a couple of pastors who are at the center of this, and some of the lay people who are center of this, meeting with a couple of pastors from, Wynn and a couple of lay people. Let's talk about how we're trying to do this. Sir, you had your hand.
Yes, my name is Larry Watson, and I work at the Church of Christ right now. Heaven Avenue, as far as relationships, I believe in that. But to build relationships where they come together, speak to one another, share a story, and then move on.
Right.
First, the racial divide has to be taken away. First, you really got to meet with the poor. The people coming home from the jail, they need to be able to come back to a community. They're not ex-offenders to be turned into citizens. We are from this program called Reunion. Reunion is all about getting people to come, and as they come, they share stories. But most importantly, what we do is share telephone numbers where we can call each other during the week.
Sure.
How can I pray for you? How can I assist you? Okay. The rich, their focus may be racism part. The poor may be, they need finance. Whatever, emotional, whatever it may be. Once we dialogue and keep meeting together, from that, it's going to spring. But the most important thing about it, right, I think it was Christ asked Peter, Peter, do you love me? You said, yes, you know I do. He asked him 3 times. He said, feed my sheep. If I can't feed myself, I don't have the spirit to feed myself, how can I feed you? If I don't understand my brokenness and don't want help to have my defensive mechanism because I may have more material things in you, how can I see or tell you what you need?
Right.
You need to be able to listen to me.
Well,
So I have these right here, reunion things, in the 1640 Glen Road. There's some on the table over there.
okay.
But how can we come together? I heard y'all got wind and everything.
Right.
How can we come together for the city can be a community again?
Well, I would hope that someone from Wynn, I think Amy had to go pick up her mother at the airport, but someone from Wynn share, or I will, a phone number, and you give us yours, and let's sit down and talk and figure out how we can do that. Because that's at the heart of it. That's really at the, getting into relationships is the heart of it. Just to wrap up, we now have a relationship with the police on the eastern part, in the eastern district in Baltimore, where they've come to trust this pastors and turn around Tuesday night. And the men and women that return from prison that are involved with us. And now we go through, they give us the names of the people from the probation department that are out, that they think are ready for a job. And now we're getting the pastors and we're going to go through relationships with them. And that's going to count towards good stuff for them to get them jobs.
Just to build on this, we had a program here on mass incarceration in the fall on how to deal with that and the church's response. And there's been a lot of interest in this congregation and others in Reunion and some of the other efforts. So if you want more about that, so here, yes. You have another question? We have time real quickly, and then we want to have a short wrap-up conversation. We're going to go about 10 more minutes, and we're going to close. Yeah, did you have a question or comment real quick?
One of the things I've heard all of my life, I also started as a Southern Baptist and got reformed. And faith, hope, and love, the greatest is love, and we never are in any danger of losing sight of faith. But I think hope has gotten out of our vocabulary. And I heard a lot about there being no hope from people in Baltimore. And hope, for me, I'm also an economist, and I think in long-range terms, Hope for me is a kid like Freddie Gray, who's now 15 years old, and through some help from us, from others, in 10 years will be graduating from Harvard, or University of Maryland, or University of DC. That is hope. It's a path. It's not a status. And what do we do for the next 10 years? Starting with 100 or 1,000 Freddie Grays and getting to a good result.
Well, I don't want to sound like a broken record, but who knew Freddie Gray?
I'm Freddie
Couple of
Gray.
his family.
I'm Freddie Gray.
Yeah.
I'm Freddie Gray. And I was afforded all those opportunities. And when I got to the position where you gentlemen were black and white, middle class, upper class, I was further disappointed. Because I was further disappointed by the male patriarchy and the white male privilege. And then I was further disappointed by the black male lack of leadership, misleadership, who didn't confront it. And so, I'm Freddie Gray for you, sitting right here in front of you, who was afforded the opportunities that alienated me from people in my community, not to associate with my colleagues, to go over here to get further segregated. And so, I live in that neighborhood. I live above Bolton Hills. And it's a sad indictment of the number of churches in that area. It is flooded with churches in that area. And I've been doing work in that area for 3 years now. And we talked about the cruciform. So, if you want a better neighborhood, how come the people who are so intellectual, who have all the resources, why don't they move in those neighborhoods? And then the neighborhoods will get better. Move in those neighborhoods. Take your family, get one of them houses, move in the neighborhood. So then we reverse gentrification. All right, and then those communities will be better. But until then, it's class, it's caste, it's race, it's male patriarchy. And let's be honest. Let's be honest. No one in this country, we learned from Katrina, no one likes to be poor. So are we going to use the cross to transform us and therefore transform this society? Or are we going to continue to pimp the cross?
Well, unfortunately, the latter is more the case.
So I just want to say, I'm the Freddie Gray in front of you. Right? Live.
Those aren't, if it's about white male privilege and all those other things you've raised, then those aren't real relationships. That's not a relationship. That's not where I see my brokenness, and you see it. I'm white, and we get to know each other. Now, I'm not saying person who had different experiences, but we're on the same footing. If I'm doing it to make myself feel better, it's not going to work. So, what we try to do, what we're going to try our best, it's not enough of us, quite honestly. That's the problem. That's why I said that the church has let all these young men down. I'm not just talking about the white church, I'm talking about the black church.
Oh, I know, really, man.
So, yeah, so, all I can say is you try to get into an authentic relationship. If it's not an authentic relationship, you ruin it even worse. Good being with you. I appreciate your questions, and I appreciate the attention you spent. My only, closing, comment is, I hope this just isn't a passing 2-hour warning, and by next Saturday it's all forgotten. So I hope in your own way, in whatever way you can, and through your own congregation organization, will act on some of this. Because if we don't act on it, then pretty empty food. Thanks.
Thank you.
Let's join hands as we pray our way out of here. And I know it's awkward, but do the best you can. Oh God, for the power of your Spirit, we are grateful. The Spirit that moves in and through each one of us and in our communities of faith. Help us, oh God, to know that deep relationship with one another is deep relationship with you. And deep relationship with you compels us towards one another in faith and hope and in love, and help us to act on the dreams that you have given, the visions that are before us. Help us to be the people that you've called us to be. In Christ's name, amen.